Hey everyone. I'm going to try something a little different this month. In addition to this video coming out, I'm going to be streaming on Twitch today, link below. I'll be there at 7 p.m. PST. We're going to be playing Resident Evil 8, starting from the top. If this goes well or you enjoy it, I've got plenty of other games that we can play. Come stop by, if you dare. But now, let's get back to the video. Welcome to Whisperwood Stories, and a happy Halloween. Today, we read a story by Genuinely Grim from Nosleep. Let's begin. I couldn't believe what treats my neighbor was giving to children on Halloween. It was late October when we finally hauled the last of our furniture into our new home. The house itself was nothing special. Brick walls, paned windows, and a slanted roof. The lawn was patchy and some of the paint was chipped, but it didn't really matter. Not at that price. As soon as we stepped out of the car, my son Henry's face scrunched up into an expression of angst. "Why aren't the houses decorated, Mom? Don't people go trick-or-treating here?" I nodded my lip, realizing he was right. There wasn't a single pumpkin, fuzzy spider, or lantern in sight. Each residence was orderly and well-kept, aside from clumps of golden leaves scattered about the driveways. "I'm sure they do," I told him in my most convincing voice. "Maybe it's just early still." "But Halloween's 6 days away," he cried, clasping his hands. "Everyone's already put up decorations on our old street, even Old Frank." Old Frank lived in our last neighborhood and was notorious for his aversion to Halloween decor. Well, any kind of decor, really. "I will not deface my property with plastic rubbish," he'd always say, whenever one of the neighbors gathered enough courage to approach him. "If you want your house looking like the devil's arse, it's fine by me. But don't touch a single blade of grass on my lawn and keep your kids away too." But despite his resolve, he'd always set out a small pumpkin on his porch with a few candy bars hidden inside. This year, he'd even scattered some bones around his lawn. Granted, they looked like a lot of chicken leftovers, but we appreciated the gesture nonetheless. "Why did we have to move here?" Henry wailed, squirming in his seat. "I want to go home." I sighed. "You know why, Henry?" We'd been strapped for cash ever since the divorce, and had no choice but to downgrade. Bristmore was a small village on the outskirts of the city. Normally, I wouldn't have considered moving so far from its comforts, but I couldn't resist the price. My job was remote either way, and relocating meant I'd be saving a huge part of my monthly income. So the arrangement seemed too good to be true. Maybe I should have known. "I'm sure you'll make plenty of friends here," I said with a smile. "I think I saw some children playing in the next house over last night. You want to go say hello?" Henry thought for a moment, clutching his red fire truck to his chest. "Yeah, okay." For a 6-year-old, my son was surprisingly assertive. He made friends easily and consorted with even the most reclusive individuals. Old Frank had come knocking on our door many times, complaining that Henry wouldn't stop peeking through his windows. But I knew he liked him all the same. He'd even taken him fishing once. "Can we ask them if they go trick-or-treating here?" As we made our way up to the steps leading to the whitewashed door of our neighbor's house. "We sure can," I replied, running my gaze over a pair of gardening shears sitting against the wall. No wonder the place was so immaculate. I was about to press the buzzer when the door flung open. "Well, hello." A woman in her early 50s appeared in the doorway. Her hair was curled into a voluptuous updo and set with copious amounts of hairspray. "You must be the Fosters. My name's Tabitha. We were all wondering when you would finally settle in. Robert assumed yesterday, but then we saw you lugging that armchair monstrosity across the yard. I told him to go help, you know. But he's been staying with our Gus day and night. He's been feeling a bit under the weather these past couple of days. But then again, Robert's constant blabbering can't possibly be doing him any good." She roared with laughter at her own joke, before shifting her gaze to Henry. "What's your name, then?" she chirped, leaning down to examine him closer. "Henry," he replied, suddenly shy. "We came to ask about the decorations." I chuckled, my cheeks prickling. We noticed that none of the houses had any Halloween decorations. Does the village not celebrate it? The woman tilted her head, her lips curving into a thin smile. "Ah, Halloween, don't you worry. We certainly do partake, of course." Her long, acrylic nails rapping against the doorframe. "We have our own traditions here in Bristmore. They may be a bit outdated compared to what you folks are used to in the city, but they're near and dear to our hearts."
"Robert, come out of that room and meet the Fosters."
"I see," I said, my eyes swiveling into the room behind her. "So, what do you do exactly? And what can we do to help?" "Oh," she waved her ringed finger. "This year the festivities are on us. Robert and I will take care of everything." She smiled with her teeth, revealing a gold-crowned molar in the back, as a bald man with a graying mustache pushed past her and stuck out his hand. "Robert," he said solemnly as I shook it. His eyes were red and puffy, and he was fidgeting with what looked like a crumpled tissue with his free hand. "I'm Allison, and this is..." I nodded toward Henry. But Robert was already heading back inside. "Oh, don't mind him," Tabitha rolled her eyes. "It's all because of our Gus. He turned 82 last month, and I keep telling Robert he's not gonna be around forever, you know. But he just won't hear it. And you know what else?" We nodded along patiently as Tabitha gave us the lowdown on each house in the neighborhood. Apparently, there were children in practically every home, and I squeezed Henry's hand in affirmation. "Are there kids in this house?" Henry piped up, as Tabitha rambled on about the baby born in number 11. "Mom said she saw some playing in the yard the other day." "Henry," I hissed, but felt relieved all the same. Kids always got away with asking questions adults couldn't. "Oh yes, there are," Tabitha cooed. "Our grandchildren come to visit every week. Claire is 7 now and Jimmy is 4, but they get along just fine. How old is your son?" "I'm 6, Henry announced, tugging at my hand. I knew standing around was exhausting for him, and truth be told, I wasn't too comfortable myself. Why hadn't Tabitha invited us inside? Was chatting at the front door yet another Bristmore custom? "So," I interjected, "before we go, I wanted to ask if decorating our own house would be of any, inconvenience to you or the other neighbors. Henry and I like to carve pumpkins and..." "Oh, sure, go ahead," Tabitha waved her hand dismissively. "Decorations don't bother us, but I think you'll find that they leave much to be desired compared to ours." We trudged back down the steps in silence. Compared to theirs, I scanned the neighboring houses one more time in case I'd missed something. A stray paper bag twirled around in the wind, dancing gracefully amidst the leaves. What decorations? The neighborhood looked like old Frank's Haven, for God's sake. Not a single hint of spooky in sight. So, Henry and I set out to fix that. carving 5 pumpkins into the most horrendous expressions we could muster and setting them out proudly on our porch. We hung orange string lights on the railings and draped cobwebs over the bushes. Once we were finished, Henry started clamoring for the fog machine at the bottom of the box, but I didn't want to go all out just yet. "Let's see how the neighbors react first, I said. "Who knows? Maybe others will put up decorations once they see ours." They didn't. Not the next day, and not the day after that. Before we knew it, it was October 31st. Had we still lived in the city, Henry and I would have spent all morning in the shopping mall, filling our cart with candy bars. Instead, I watched as the hem of a stray cobweb fluttered in the wind through the kitchen window. It didn't feel like Halloween. Not at all. Bristmore was nothing like the city in that regard. No costumes, no candy, and no cheer. Only fog, damp, and complete and utter emptiness. A couple of passers-by were making their way along the street, turning their heads to look at our pumpkins and lights. I expected them to stop and admire our hard work, but even from a distance, I could see their mouths contorting in mocking smiles. "The hell?" I muttered under my breath. "What's your problem?" I had no idea what to expect. I mean, I had several boxes of chocolates stashed away just in case any children turned up, but it didn't look likely. To make matters worse, Henry had been dressed in his Batman suit since 7 in the morning. "Trick or treat, trick or treat," he chanted, racing around and around the living room. By 6 p.m., I started seriously considering making the 2-hour drive to the city. Henry was starting to get restless, and the fog outside seemed to be growing thicker and more depressing by the second. Where was everyone, for God's sake? Tabitha had told us there were many children in the neighborhood, but I'd yet to see a single one. "Tell you what," I said to Henry, who was watching TV slumped over the coffee table. "Why don't we get in the car and drive to the city? We can visit the haunted house on the way. I heard they have a good one this year." His eyes lit up. "Really? But it's so far." I sighed. It was far, and expensive, but I couldn't bear to look at the disappointment on my son's face any longer. "Come on," I said, grabbing the car keys before I could change my mind. "Let's go." But what we saw when we opened the front door immediately stopped us in our tracks. A child, dressed up in a brightly colored suit, carrying a small pumpkin-shaped basket in his hand. In the thick evening fog, his already small frame looked almost cartoonish as he bobbed up and down, merrily strolling the driveway across from ours. "Look!" Henry gasped, pointing in case I'd missed it. "He's trick-or-treating!" We watched in wide-eyed fascination as the child in question rang the doorbell and the porch light came on. As soon as the door cracked open, a cacophony of gleeful oohs and ahs pierced the silence. "Trick-or-treat!" the child exclaimed, his voice being carried by the wind. "Thank you." The door shut, and he continued back down the driveway and along the street to the next house. It was a sight for sore eyes, a small glimmer of hope in a dark abyss. And then, another child appeared, and another. They emerged from the bleak fog like small figurines clad in colorful costumes, carrying wands and baskets and elaborate swords. Can I go too?" Henry asked, obviously dazed by the sight. "There are so many." I heaved a sigh of relief. Despite the lack of decorations, Halloween seemed to be in full swing, and I'd be spared the drive to the big city. "Of course you can," I told him, ruffling his hair. "But don't be too long, okay? And don't eat the candy until you get home." He nodded, grabbing his own little basket and making his way toward the other children. I knew he'd have no problem making friends. As soon as I glanced out at the street through the kitchen window, He was already standing in a small circle of kids and gesturing wildly with his hands. I chuckled to myself, blissfully unaware of what was to come. Henry returned at around 9 p.m. It had started raining about an hour prior, but despite being soaked, he seemed giddy and excited. I had long since depleted my entire supply of chocolate and had resorted to giving out regular apples, much to the collective dismay of the kids. "I made friends," he boasted, jumping up and down. "There's Max and Aline and a boy called Lars who said he'd show me his race car collection." I laughed along, helping him out of his wet clothes and into pajamas. "I'm glad you had fun. Did you get a lot of candy?" "Yes," he cried, grabbing his basket and pouring the contents onto the floor. "Look, someone gave me a whole bag of Snickers." I let him have one as I sifted through the rest without much interest. There was certainly enough for months to come. Packets of gummy bears, chocolate bars, licorice, candy corn, and... "Wait, what's this?" I asked, picking up a small parcel wrapped in white tissue paper. Henry looked at it dismissively. "Cake, I think? Everyone got one." Slowly, I undid the tweed bow and tossed it aside. Felt like cake. Could have been cake, for all I knew. Except, I wasn't sure how comfortable I was with the concept of my son eating. I stared at it, my skin prickling. It wasn't cake. Not even close. Fighting the overwhelming urge to retch, I folded it back into the tissue paper and placed it on the floor. My head swimming, and my vision suddenly blurry. I watched my son shoveling chocolate into his mouth. Where did you get this?" I managed, my mouth dry. He didn't even look away from the screen. "The woman next door." "Tabitha?" I croaked, my heart hammering in my chest. Every hair on my body was standing on end. Reluctantly, Henry averted his gaze from the TV. His chewing slowed when he noticed my expression. "Are you okay?" Struggling to breathe, I scrambled to my feet and leaned against the wall for support. I could smell it, its rancid stench permeating the air, making my stomach churn. Nausea bubbled up in my throat and I clutched my neck, trying to keep it at bay. "Mom?" Henry sounded genuinely concerned now, dropping the candy onto the couch and running towards me. "What's wrong?" Nothing, I choked, my throat bulging with pressure. I couldn't let my son see this. "Is it the cake?" he demanded, staring at the parcel on the floor. "Has it gone bad?" He leaned down to pick it up. "Don't touch it!" I cried, yanking him away. "Just go to your room." He stared at me, startled by my change in demeanor, his hands limp at his sides. "But he began, but I wasn't having it. "Did you hear what I said? Go to your room, now!" His bottom lip quivered, and I saw his eyes brim with tears as he turned his back to me and left the room. Guilt seeped into my heart, but I brushed it away, reminding myself I had far more pressing matters to deal with. "Okay," I whispered under my breath, leaning down to pick up the parcel. "Okay." But it wasn't okay. As soon as I touched it, my skin crawled and my gag reflex kicked in again. This time, I couldn't hold it back. Or perhaps I just didn't try. When I regained control of my body, I stumbled into the darkness towards the front door. Wiping my crusty lips with the back of my sleeve, I composed myself the best I could before stepping out into the chilly night air. The street was deserted. The colorful figurines that had previously twirled amidst the houses were gone, and the only sounds were those of the wind howling and a crow cawing in the distance. Wrapping my shawl tighter around my shoulders, I headed straight for Tabitha and Robert's house, my knees weak and my head still reeling from what I'd just seen. I mashed the buzzer and hit the door with my fist for good measure. I hadn't even considered what I was going to say. "Hello, did you give this to my son by accident or on purpose?" I shook my head free, the troubling thought, as I heard footsteps approaching the door from the other side.
I don't know who it is. It's not for another half hour.
I heard Tabitha's raspy voice. The door opened just a crack. "Oh, Allison. How may I help you?" She looked different that night. Somehow. Even more made up than the last time I had seen her. She was wearing a long sequin dress and red lipstick to match. "Oh, I'm sorry," I muttered, caught off guard. "My son, Henry, brought this home?" I attempted to slide the parcel out of my pocket with as little movement as possible. I placed it in 4 additional plastic bags before leaving the house, yet the smell had somehow become ingrained in my memory nonetheless. I held my breath as I passed it to her. "Oh," she pursed her lips. "Didn't he like it?" I gawked at her, dumbfounded. I heard that correctly? "I'm sorry, it's I stammered, bile rising in my throat once again. "A kidney," Tabitha nodded, a faint smile on her face. "Did he prefer something else?" It's like I'd lost my ability to breathe, to think. This had to be an elaborate prank, right? "This isn't funny," I whispered. "Handing out animal organs to children? Who do you think you are?" Her amusement was unmatched. She studied me for a moment, before removing the chain and opening the door. "It's not an animal organ," she sounded hurt. "It's human. Our own. Poor Gus sacrificed his life, and you dare complain?" I felt the ground sliding from underneath my feet. My heartbeat roared in my ears, and I tasted metal. Trying to catch my breath, I slumped down on the small bench beside the front door and buried my face in my hands. This was a dream. It had to be. I was going to wake up any minute now and... "Here, drink this." Tabitha appeared next to me and held out a glass of clear liquid. It looked like water, but I couldn't be sure. She must have noticed my apprehension, because she lifted the glass to her lips and took a sip. "See? Not a poison." Hesitantly, I took it into my shaking hands and tried to take a sip, but my teeth kept clinking against the edge. "Oh, Lord," Tabitha sighed, as if it was somehow my fault. "It'll be okay. Gus lived a good life. I promise. It was his time." I couldn't believe how casually she had said it. It was as though human sacrifice was an everyday occurrence, as simple as going to work or brushing one's teeth. "Well, look, I can't stay with you all night," she said, towering over me. "The show's about to begin, and I haven't even started on the pit." I shut my eyes, willing myself to wake up, snap out of it, or do anything to put an end to the absolute nightmare I was experiencing in that moment. The pit?" I repeated, my voice meek. "What show?" Tabitha threw her head back and roared with laughter. "You can come watch if you like. I won't suggest you partake this time around, since you seem so... well, let's just say it's not for the faint of heart. Still, it's good you brought the kidney. The show can't go on without it." With that, she sauntered back into her house, leaving me to my own devices on the front porch. I sat, shaking like a leaf on the hard bench, wondering what on earth I was going to do now. I could call the police, but not that I had any proof. Tabitha seemed so calm and collected. What if the police were in on it too? No, that couldn't be. Was I losing my mind? Before I could explore that thought further, the front door flew open and Tabitha backtracked over the threshold, lugging what looked like a large wooden crate. She wasn't alone. Robert followed suit, holding up the other end of the elongated contraption. They trudged past me in silence, huffing under their breath.
It's almost time,
Tabitha grunted, lowering the crate onto the ground in the front yard.
Get the bell.
What's she doing here? Robert snarled, giving me the side-eye. It's not time yet. Tabitha clicked her tongue.
She's not got the backbone, Rob. Now get the darn bell before I remove yours too.
Grumbling under his breath, Robert disappeared into the house and swiftly returned with a large handbell.
Right,
Tabitha snapped.
Here we go.
She raised the handbell over her head and wrung her wrist 5 times. The sound echoed through the air, sending shrill vibrations into the night sky. Immediately, every porch was bathed in light. Doors flung open and dozens of people, big and small, clad in colorful costumes, started making their way towards the shrine in Tabitha and Robert's yard. There were clowns with big round noses, fairies with sparkling wings, vampires with red cloaks, and knights with silver swords. It was truly a sight to behold. The formerly desolate little village had transformed into one of mesmerizing beauty beyond my wildest dreams. A crowd of magical creatures swarmed the front yard, laughter penetrating the air. But before I could get my fill, Tabitha raised the bell, and the chatter died down.
Now, for our guest of honor,
she bellowed, ringing the bell once.
Our initiator and oldest member, please welcome Revenant Frank.
The crowd dispersed, and a frail-looking man in a black coat emerged from their midst. He approached the shrine and bowed, as hushed murmurs permeated the audience. Then, he reached up and removed his hood, unveiling his face. It was old Frank. I gasped, immediately slapping my mouth shut with my hands. The last thing I needed was to be seen. Thank God the porch light wasn't on. I hugged my shawl tighter around my shoulders.
Let's begin, old Frank croaked,
raising his arms towards the sky.
Bring your offerings. Let us celebrate Gus's prosperous life.
A girl wearing a blue dress came forward. She couldn't have been older than 4, but her expression was solemn and far too mature for a child her age. In her left hand, she held a plastic bag. She nodded to the revenant and set the bag down on the ground. Reaching into it, she pulled out. No, couldn't be. It was a severed head. I held my breath, trying not to gag. She clutched it, cupping its cheeks with her little hands as though it were no more than a porcelain doll. Some doll. I shuddered at my own comparison. I watched in horror as she placed the head down on the wooden crate, adjusting it by a tuft of its gray hair. Very good, old Frank mumbled, nodding towards the shrine. Who's next? One by one, each person presented their offering. Some brought fingers, others an organ or 2. Some even had teeth.
Don't be shy. Slide them in, slide them in.
Tabitha cooed, prying Gus's mouth open.
All must be in their place.
Once all the offerings were deposited, old Frank circled the shrine, analyzing it carefully. Something is missing, he eventually said. Who hasn't come forward? No one spoke up. The crowd waited with bated breath, but the only confession was that of the whispering trees.
Who didn't bring their offering?
The revenant demanded.
Speak up.
A hubbub in the back of the crowd caught my attention. Someone was trying to make their way through.
I didn't,
a familiar voice chimed. My heart dropped. Henry. He was still in his pajamas. His face still blotchy, tear-stained. He hadn't even bothered doing up his shoelaces. "What is your offering?" Old Frank asked, once he'd approached the front of the shrine. Henry sniffled.
I don't know. My mom took it away.
A gasp echoed through the audience, and I noticed the kidney was still on the ground next to me. I couldn't do it. I couldn't speak up. I couldn't let them know I was here. "Your mom took it away?" Old Frank seemed astounded. "And where is she?" My stomach lurched as dozens of eyes crawled past the shrine and up onto the porch where I was hiding. Could they see me in the darkness? How did they know I was there? "Mom." Suddenly Henry was looking straight at me. "Can I have the offering?" I didn't know what to do. Fear sizzled through me like electricity as I tried to regain control of my body. Slowly, I moved one arm, then another, then my legs, willing myself to stand up and pick up the wretched parcel off of the floor. The crowd watched in silence. It was as though the entire world had stopped turning, waiting for me to compose myself. With trembling hands, I scooped the offering off of the ground. The smell was just as strong, only now it was stronger. One step at a time, I dragged my feet along the porch and down the wooden stairs. Everyone was waiting. "Thank you," Henry whispered as I passed the parcel to him, nearly dropping it as I did so. He retracted the plastic bags one by one, his expression remaining unchanged even as he reached the core. I watched as my 6-year-old son placed the final offering onto the shrine, and the crowd cheered. "Very good," Old Frank mumbled. "Now, for the ceremony." The ceremony? What ceremony? But before I had a chance to ask, the shrine burst into a myriad of golden flames. The blaze reached towards the sky, wisps of smoke twirling in the cold air. All around me, clowns danced with fairies, knights waltzed with vampires, all to the beat of an invisible drum. Henry was standing next to Old Frank, clutching his hand, the stench from before the bonfire enveloping the neighborhood. Everything went black. When I awoke, the sun was already high in the sky. I was in my own bed, although I didn't immediately recognize my surroundings. Previous nights seemed like it had only been a lifelike nightmare, a product of my own weary mind. Throwing the covers to the side, I slid out of bed and looked out the window. The crowd was gone. The shrine was nowhere to be seen. The fog had lifted too, and the street suddenly seemed pleasant and inviting. "Henry?" I called, stepping into the corridor. "Are you awake?" There was no answer. A note sat on the kitchen table. It read, "I'm having breakfast at Tabitha's." Panic-stricken, I crumpled it up and headed out the front door. What was he doing there, for God's sake? "Oh good, you're here." Tabitha smiled at me, a strange twinkle in her eyes. "Henry's just having his breakfast. Come in, we have much to discuss." I wanted to tell her there wasn't anything that I'd possibly be interested in hearing, but kept my mouth shut, instead following her into the kitchen. My son was sitting at the table in the middle of the room, scooping fried eggs onto his plate. "Henry," I said, my voice pleading, "let's go home. We're moving back to the city." Tabitha snorted. "Oh, no, you're not. You're part of the initiation now." I gaped at her. What initiation? She pursed her lips. Were you not present last night? And then, as if through a painful haze, the memories came flooding back. The shrine, the stench, old Frank. I grit my teeth, not wanting to remember, willing them not to be true. Tabitha was already speaking. We have a yearly rotation system. Every household must volunteer one member of their family, be it the youngest and the most helpless, or the oldest and most experienced. It doesn't matter to Revenant Frank. He's been sacrificed a total of 3 times now. And he keeps coming back stronger every time. Not something anyone else has been able to replicate. I stared at her, wondering which of us was closer to losing our minds. Old Frank had come back to life 3 times? All this time, I thought they were just mispronouncing the word reverend. Or perhaps it was meant as a term of, well, endearment? Something to enhance the spirit of Halloween? Now, if you don't perform your duties as a household, you will automatically, no questions asked, be assigned the main role in the next initiation. We have eyes everywhere. She cackled, as if the apparent terror on my face were the funniest thing in the world. And of course, the ceremony will continue until there's no one left, Henry chimed in, and my mouth fell open. What had they done to my son? I needed time. Time to think, to come up with a plan. How had things suddenly gone so wrong? So who decides which household's turn it is? I whispered, my throat closing up. Oh, we always go clockwise. She snickered, patting my shoulder. It's your turn next year. Thank you for listening to Whisperwood Stories. If you enjoyed, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe down below. Do you have a story that you'd like me to read here? Consider commenting or sending it to whisperwoodsubmissions@gmail.com. Want to support me? Consider sending me a donation through the PayPal link in the description below. The story in this video was read with the author's permission. Thank you again for listening, and be sure to check out the original Reddit post. Don't let the shadows get too close.